What have you witnessed someone do that made you realize she is really, really smart? Story 1. My wife's grandfather. He's a retired electrical engineer with a dozen patents to his name, and a long list of recognitions I can't be bothered to remember or name. I always knew he was brilliant, but never realized just how, until one day last year we were visiting and he got a phone call. Keep in mind he's been retired for 20 years and is 86 years old. The phone call was from an electrical engineering firm from halfway across the globe asking if they could fly him out to a site and have him consult on the energy capture of a hydroelectric dam they were building. They'd run into a problem that none of them all electrical engineers could solve. They had consulted 3 of the top related university departments in the US on the issue, and the last one had referred them to him. 20 minutes on the phone, and he agreed to think about it. 2 days later he had solved their issue and written the solution on a single 8 by 11 sheet of paper, which he scanned and emailed to the company. He said he took so long to write it up because he didn't want to have to fly all the way there at his age. His explanation was so clear I was able to understand and follow it with no relevant higher education. Story 2. In high school I had a friend who we made fun of all the time for being dumb, but he would have the wackiest ideas that would somehow work. One time, around Christmas of my sophomore year, a few of us decided to buy a 30-pack, and then later decided we didn't feel like drinking it that night. I couldn't keep it at my house, but one of my friend's parents was coming to pick all my buddies up. Nobody knew how they were going to get the 30 out of my house into one of their houses. Then my friend came up with the genius idea. He went upstairs in my house and wrapped the 30 in wrapping paper. He then proceeded to carry it right out to the car with our friend's mom waiting and say it was a gift for his girlfriend who he was going to be seeing later that night. I realized that not being great at school doesn't mean someone isn't ingenious. I knew 2 guys in undergraduate who would play mental chess. As they'd passed in the hall, one guy would say knight to queen 3 or whatever. The other guy would roll back his eyes for a second and then nod to acknowledge the move. Both guys then kept walking in opposite directions. Later that day, when they passed again, the second guy would declare his counter move. A game could last days and they never forgot where any of the pieces were. Each had a mental image of the board. Sure, they might have been faking, but these guys were always first and second on the dean's honor list for all 4 years of my undergraduate. I knew them pretty well. I think the mental chess was legit. Story 3. It's true. They did a study where they had master and up-level players look at chess positions that had been arrived at by an actual game for a few seconds, then try and recreate the board from memory. They all did phenomenally well and for the most part could always recreate the board. Then they did the same thing with non-chess players, and they weren't nearly as good. Then they did the same thing with randomly generated board positions that hadn't been arrived at by a game. The masters were still better at recreation, but the gap had significantly narrowed, and they no longer recreated them all with 100% accuracy. Story 4. Sitting in a best friend's apartment on the East Coast in the mid-1980s. He's working on some code on a prototype Unix workstation MIPS had given him. He runs his program, and it produces an answer, then runs it again and produces a different answer. Thinks about it for a minute and pronounces the CPU is broken. Right? The CPU is broken. Never heard that one before. Has it occurred to you that? Yes, it had occurred to him. Went through 3 or 4 scenarios. Then he pulled out the machine-level debugger and started stepping through the code. Look, right here. The flags weren't updated right in this instruction. Yeah, whatever. Sends email on the brand new internet to MIPS. Gets a response the next day. Oh, you have that CPU. We have verified your issue. We will put a replacement in the mail. Promptly, his CPU was broken. 30 minutes from diagnosis to request to repair. Story 5. I accidentally got a promotion literally yesterday doing something like this. I'm a contract attorney doing doc review and randomly get an email saying they are going to bring in 20% of people for conversations. I immediately crap my pants and assume I am in trouble. My initial reaction is, well, crap, if I had more frequent feedback I could code documents accurately with better consistency. Sort of pack a parachute for if they ask why I'm freaking up. Turns out the meeting is just a sample of people they wanted to ask about how management was doing, if we had the right tools, if we had too many meetings, if we needed something, blah blah. Basically just getting feedback about how the project is going. Since I already have my previous excuse on deck, I just sort of blurted out. The dude seems really interested and takes a bunch of notes. Fast forward to yesterday, I get an email saying they want another meeting. They made me a frickin' QC team leader reviewing and managing a group of like 15 people because I apparently have such a deep insight into the importance of quality feedback in maintaining consistency. TLDR, in a panicky attempt to push blame aside, I cheat-coded the right set of buzzwords to finagle a promotion I have no business having. Story 6. My dad had a business trip in Seattle that I tagged along on so I could see a soccer match and explore the city. He invited me to go to the research hospital with him one day, and I agreed. They were working on testing some type of cardiovascular tool on a cadaver that they would stimulate blood flow into test. Seeing my dad, who didn't go to college, barely graduated from high school, lived on welfare with a single mom, and who knocked up a teenage girl when he was a teenager himself, performed surgery on a cadaver using a tool he invented that could potentially save thousands of lives, blew my mind. He had hundreds of patents on devices. I got surgery 3 years ago and my shoulder surgeon used a tool he invented in the 90s. He's an incredibly smart and hard-working man who got just the right amount of luck to get him where he is today. I'm spending the day with him. If you have any specific questions, feel free to ask. I'll be answering throughout the day sporadically since we are going to the movies and getting lunch. I always knew my fiancé was smart, but I found out he could multiply big numbers off the top of his head. I was spouting out random numbers for him to multiply with a calculator in hand, and after a few seconds he'd say the correct answer. It was the first time I understood how a high school bully feels when they have the overwhelming urge to bully a nerd. Of course, I mean that in the most loving way possible. Story 7. Wife is smart, like 6 languages fluently, smart without breaking a sweat. Has never not done well in school, always gets promoted, etc., but no one in my family saw this because she's an introvert and tries to keep herself dumb so people get her and like her. My family and I are smart. She's next level up. Suo. After we got engaged, family had got together, as in cousins, friends, lots of people. As usual, we played some group games. She was reluctant, but I pulled her aside and asked her to try and fit in. She obliged, but was annoyed with me. Started with Pictionary, she schooled the room. Moved to a bunch of card games with a single deck. Counted cards, knew everyone's decks, etc. Quiz board game, knew all the answers. Over and over again, she was dominant to the point of silencing my family. It was unnerving even for me. A few weeks later, when we visited her family, we don't play games with soon-to-be Mrs. Frogtush. She plays to decimate the competition. Story 8. Growing up, your dad is always that nut. At least mine was. Always thought of him as a joker who liked to invent stuff around the house. Long story short, when I was around 12, he made a basic hydrogen engine. He was on track to making it practical for his van and was so stoked, claiming he would get up to 4-5 more miles to the gallon. He was able to make a small hydrogen cell and a housing for it and set it in his van. It was so complicated I can't even explain it properly. He got 3-4 more miles to the gallon, so his prediction was pretty close. He was then stuck on how to get more out of it, make it cheaper, and maybe pitch his idea to get it on the markets. One day he was Googling new ideas and came across an uni that basically did the same thing before him. The details, but it crushed him. He stopped working on it, kinda stopped making stuff. A few years ago I was home visiting and was walking through his workshop and found the cell tucked away all dusty. It dawned on me then that I will never come close to being as smart and intuitive as my father. I told him before I left too. My old man cried. I cried. It was great. Hello, the editor here. That last story was too cool. Like and subscribe for more. Story 9. One of my best friends from high school was like a real-life Good Will Hunting story. We came from a small, blue-collar town. His parents were relatively poor. He was pretty much unheard of and unpopular, but not nerdy or geeky ... more so hung out with the druggies and rock band types. Until he got to high school, he started becoming fascinated with math and physics ... He would spend hours at the library just reading books upon books on the topics. Apparently he scored perfect or close to it on his AP exams in calculus and physics. As a sophomore in high school, our physics teacher at the school immediately took him under his wing, and before his sophomore year was over, he was teaching college math classes. He went on to get his doctorate from an Ivy League school, and of course is a professor now, but he is definitely the smartest person I know. We used to sit at coffee shops in high school and he would just start doodling long, complex math problems on his napkin. It was way beyond anything I could understand, and I had taken all the same AP-type classes he did. Apparently someone thinks I'm lying. FYI, this was 20 years ago. I feel old. but I may have gotten the timing wrong of when he took his AP exams. It must have been his freshman year in the spring semester, because I know for sure he was teaching at the major university near our hometown by his sophomore year. Story 10. My father's not-so-kind nickname is Rainman. Within his field, he's beyond brilliant, and when literally everyone was losing money or straight-up bankrupting, he was absorbing smaller competitors and taking assets when they defaulted on loans he provided. I knew he was a shrewd businessman, but it came to a head a few years ago when I was going to do a silver deal for him. This included taking a bag of silver coins at about $100 face value to sell. For those that don't know, during the time of coin silver, $1 face of silver equals roughly 1 troy ounce of silver by mass. As I was leaving, I asked him how much I should expect to get. He said $3,000 from across the house. This hadn't been weighted or counted. All I had done was check that there were no better dates. We had bought the silver earlier that day from another broker. I took it to the buyer, we counted it. Came out to $99.90 of silver face. Came out to about $2,997 when all was said and done. Think the guy even rounded up to $3,000 as a solid to my dad. This silver never saw a scale, it went through a counter. My dad accurately guessed the weight and value from the one time he carried it. It was also bought from the original seller as part of a bulk package, so we weren't entirely sure of its value. Story 11. My younger brother did really badly at school. He had tutors, aftercare. My mother went absolutely mad with frustration. When he did his finals, he did miserably and didn't get university endorsement, i.e. the education board's little stamp of approval that says you're smart enough for university. He went straight to work at the place he'd done work experience at, and within a year he was promoted, highly praised for his work, exceeding expectations. Last year he was offered and accepted a job to work for Amazon. He's already been promoted. His girlfriend, who A, was his first girlfriend and B, M, he only met at 21, and him, are moving in together tomorrow. She's going to study in the city they moved to, and I couldn't be prouder of how this stupid little cockroach brother of mine turned out so amazingly. Story 12. Finally something I can contribute. Back in college I had 3 roommates, an engineer major, pre-med and pharmacy major. Let's call him Ray. Ray met his girlfriend freshman year and they dated throughout undergrad and PharmD school. Our school had an intense pharmacy program and we see students working and studying their butt off. Ray's girlfriend always set up these study groups and invite Ray, but Ray never attended and would lie to his girlfriend that he was studying on his own. The roommates and I knew what's up. Ray was always in his room playing video games, watching TV, movies. The guy never talked about class, but he attended every session and lab. Every midterm he took he aced, and that really pissed off his girlfriend and pharmacy friends. The crowning moment that I knew this guy was a genius happened during sophomore year spring finals. I was up late studying and Ray was on his computer playing CS. He suddenly got up, went to his closet, pulled out one of his textbook, took off the shrink wrap, looked at a page, put the book back in his closet and resumed playing a CS. I was like, dude, what the frick? He said he had a final in the morning and forgot a compound formula and had to look it up. I lived with this guy for another 2 years and he never studied and textbooks were still shrink wrapped up. Story 13. My husband and I aren't sophisticated. At night we wind down by watching Family Guy, etc. Although is worthy to note he watches shows about how anything is made or done, etc. He drinks beer at a night after work and loves his old fab, this Flana with holes in it. Anyway, we are at my in-laws' place. Everyone possibly connected are there. A quiz show comes on and it seems like a good idea to do trivia in partners. I say yes, knowing that we are up against professors, doctor and hospital directors. We were going down. Not only did my husband answer all the questions first and correct, he beat everyone. It all came to an end when he chugged his beer and burped really loud. My husband is successful in his field, especially with numbers and measurement types of things, but I never realized how much information he retains. I just kinda thought he was smart about the industry he worked in. Story 14. My mom stays rational when the media hypes stuff. I remember the swine flu hysteria in 2008 and she would explain to me how the flu can be dangerous only for some people, not everyone, and that the swine flu is only hyped because it's a new strain that few people are resistant to, which turned out to be accurate. But what impressed me the most was that she called out the nasty side effects of the swine flu vaccine. Not what they would be, but she said it wasn't necessary unless you belonged in a vulnerable group and that the vaccine couldn't possibly be safe when it is rushed out like that. It's made me trust her judgment a lot. Another time, around the same time actually, I saw a documentary about autism and savants. On nothing but a hunch I went over to the blind kid in school which I knew and he liked me and asked him to tell me the first weekday of October times 1974. Took him half a second to respond with Tuesday. I confirmed it on my phone. He's not a savant, but he is ridiculous at math. I drilled him on it as long as he thought it was fun. I even showed him off to other people. He liked it. He didn't know how impressive it was to us, but he enjoyed the recognition. Story 15. My ex was clever, probably too clever for his own good. He'd take things in and remember them. He'd work things out and basically come across as very bright. He couldn't be bothered with school, yet got straight A's. We both worked at a theme park and he was able to work out the systems and algorithms of the rides by just watching them. We spent a lot of time watching them, I know, but I didn't know anyone who would work out the pattern of a drop tower and other things like that. Other little things that stood out, I would be in my car and he'd turn up the radio stupidly loud, and I'd turn it back down a bit so we could at least talk to each other. He pointed out that I always settled having the dial on number 14. I never looked at it. I just always landed on it. Sometimes he'd be telling me something he'd noticed me do in a social situation and give a reason as to why I'd done it. When he told me, I'd realize that I had actually done that, and for the exact reasoning he'd given. Shame was, he got bored with things. He got bored with me and just ended it like a flick of a switch. People who are pretty clever have a social downfall quite a lot of the time, and his was his complete lack of ability to be empathetic, and that shined through sometimes. Edit. As this picked up a bit, I'll go into more detail. He probably did have a mild form of autism or Asperger's, but I only noticed that in hindsight. I've thought of a few other things. I used to play Led Zeppelin in my car a lot. I freaking love them, and one day when I put on Immigrant Song, he managed to ad-lib a whole new first verse about him not wanting to listen to it, and that I should put on the radio instead, and it was spot on. He had a very quick sense of humor. A lot of people who aren't as clever do. I think I'm fairly quick, but most of the time I come across as quite cutting rather than funny. But sometimes he could just say one word on the end of a sentence or comment on something that would happen and it would be hilarious and perfect for the situation. Obviously they all played well, but I've seen him play people. We're both bi, and I said as long as I knew what he was doing, he could mess about sending nudes to girls and stuff. He never sent nudes, not once, but he used to get a flurry back under the pretense of starting a relationship. Then, he'd just say thanks, but I'm not interested anymore, bye. I used to find that funny, but now I look back realize what a horrible thing it was to do. And finally, the ending of our relationship. Me, everything okay. You seem kinda distant over the past couple of weeks. Him, I don't like you anymore. I'm not going to tell you why, I just don't, and I think it's better we don't go out anymore. And then he blocked me over social media and my phone number, and that was exactly how it panned out. I just took out a few inclusions of my name. Next I heard or saw of him was 4 months later at a social event, and he started chatting to me as if we were best friends. I stupidly chatted to him like the same as I was still hurting and wanted him back. I asked him to unblock me on Facebook so we could talk things over, and he said yes. He never did. That was December last year, and that was the last I ever heard directly from him. He went out with a friend of mine for a bit, but they broke up for similar reasons in February. I occasionally look him up on Facebook on an alt account, and he seems to have turned into a bit of a recluse. He loved gaming and had a big gaming computer, but he used to only spend 1 or 2 nights a week playing games on it. Now, his wall is full of screenshots. I just think that is such a waste. Someone who was clever, funny and kind for the most part. It was only that streak of cold nastiness that prevented him from being the one I could spend my life with. Story 16. A friend and I had been out drinking over Christmas, and being the final evening to get festively inebriated before Santa arrived, the town was abnormally busy, resulting in the two of us being completely unable to hail or book a taxi home when the bars finally shut. As we had each consumed a skinful of assorted liquors, we were both famished and discussed food. We decided to navigate toward a convenient Chinese takeaway nearby as it was close, was open, and we could eat something whilst trying to arrange a taxi home, we thought. It was at this point that my friend called the takeaway restaurant and ordered our choice of food to be delivered to his home. We then continued onward towards the restaurant and, when arriving, waited about the parking lot outside. Once we saw the delivery driver come out and get into his car, my friend yelled, "Hey, is that for my friend's name, address?" Driver confirmed. We had a brief chat, and after reminding him that we are paying for delivery, he is going that way anyway, he agrees to let us hitch a free ride with our food. Essentially, we managed to get home, ate food and saved on taxi money. Story 17. Another dad story. When my dad told me what he used to do for a living, I knew he'd been some sort of electrical engineer, nuclear physicist, but I didn't really know what he'd done. Turns out he was on the team that invented the CT scanner, and his boss, Godfrey Hounsfield, was a Nobel Prize winner. The maths behind it are freaking mind-bending. Never mind converting all of that into components that generate the correct signals at the right time and then into an intelligible output, and they built it out of El Cheapo components, using borrowed equipment on a shoestring budget. The scale of the challenge is just off the hook. Once the first machine rolled into production, he had to go to the site and help the doctors analyze exactly what they were looking at. That's now a whole field of medicine that you specialize in. He made it up on the fly. Story 18. Watching a surgeon complete a difficult surgery. It's gruesome and perhaps a little terrifying for the squeamish, but by God is it ever amazing to watch a gaping incision stitched neatly back up again. It's their job to perform that surgery, but that doesn't make it any less impressive for the newbie watching them work. Second, unrelated example. My great-grandmother was the historian for my hometown. She wrote and published a book on the town history, and I don't think I really gave her as much credit as she deserved. I always respected her, but her knowledge of the community, including the local First Nations community, was a little beyond my understanding as a kid. She was a smart woman. Story 19. My son was a freshman last year dealing with depression. He rarely got out of bed outside of doing small workouts so he wouldn't look even more ugly. He ended up missing like 3/4 of a school year, being jumbled around and not really being in any classes long term. Eventually, I forced him to take the standards of learning per calculus test so he wouldn't fail. In return, he wanted to spend some time with me to remind him of when things were better. He managed to get a 600 over 600. I was excited to pass on this news, but when I woke him up from his sleep, he flipped me the bird because it apparently wasn't worth waking him up from his nap. Strange, but lovable kid, I suppose. Story 20. This will probably be buried, but here goes. My older brother is severely mentally disabled. He only knows a few words, never forms full sentences, and lives in a group home with full-time care at 25. When he was younger, about 15, he was going to a special school in a city about 4 hours away from home. We would pick him up and bring him home for holidays and some weekends, usually about once every 2-3 months. Once, we were driving him home after having picked him up for Christmas. I was in the back seat and he was in the passenger seat. My mom was driving. My mom and I were talking about something, can't remember what, but all of a sudden my brother starts cracking up and yelling "Mom," for no apparent reason. This wasn't really out of the ordinary, so we kind of ignored it and kept talking. He kept laughing loudly for the next 5 minutes or so. After those 5 minutes, my mom finally realized she had missed the exit off the highway to get to our house. My brother knew exactly what she had done as soon as she missed it.